We left off at 1 Samuel chapter 13, and basically the Israelites were getting pummeled by the Philistines, and they were not victorious. Saul's basically all about himself, beating his chest, da-da-da-da, I'm the king, which obviously we know Samuel anointed him because God told Samuel to anoint him. And so now you get into chapter 14, his son, Jonathan, and his armor bearer, Jonathan's armor bearer, they go out and they're like, hey, let's just check and see if the Philistines are still wanting to fight us. They go out into a field, pop their heads up. The Philistines see them and say, hey, they're coming out of their hiding in the caves and everything else. And Jonathan's like, let's go get them. So Jonathan and his armor bearer, they go out there and they battle and kill 20 guys. And it sends the Philistines into hysteria that they start fighting amongst themselves. And so then Saul comes in. He's like, let's take a head count. Who's not here? Oh, my son's not here. He's the one that went out and fought the Philistines. Okay, now we're going to go out and we're going to fight the Philistines because they were victorious. Jonathan and his armor bearer were victorious. So now Saul and his men join the battle, and they won. King Saul's like back on top again. They beat the Philistines, but not completely run them out. That's chapter 14. Chapter 15, let me pull some verses out here that are intriguing to us. It says, then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, who remember was the priest that anointed Saul. He said, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I made Saul king. This is God speaking to Samuel. I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me and has not carried out my instructions. Did not God know that from the very beginning? Of course he did. So Samuel became angry and cried out to the Lord all night. He's like, you just laid a heavy one on me, God, that you regret Saul as king. And here's the thing, is God regretted that he made Saul king literally because of Saul's actions. Not because God felt that he had made a mistake in appointing Saul as Israel's king, but this is on Saul. His decisions were what God was regretting. In verse 24, it says, Saul answered Samuel, I have sinned. He's basically repenting, Saul is. I have sinned. I have transgressed the Lord's command and your words because I was afraid of the people. I obeyed them. It was making it about himself. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin and return with me so I can worship the Lord. Samuel replied to Saul, I will not return with you. Because you rejected the word of the Lord has rejected you from the king over Israel. You're a fallen king. Still the king, but now that's not who God wants to be king. When Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed the corner of his robe and it tore. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingship of Israel away from you today and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you. Someone else is going to be king? Furthermore, the Eternal One of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not man who changes his mind. God knew from the very, very beginning what was going to happen here. You get down to verse 35, it says, even to the day of his death, Samuel never saw Saul again. Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted he had made Saul king over Israel. I totally get that. Sometimes I have to tell the obvious to my friends here. You just have to state the obvious. And sometimes they make bad choices. And as it says right there, he mourns for them. That's all I can do. I mourn for my friends that make bad choices. Well, it's not my choice. It's not my burden. It's not my fault. It's not my thing. But I feel sorry for them because they have to go through it. Get to chapter 16. It says, the Lord said to Samuel, How long are you going to mourn for Saul since I have rejected him as king over Israel? All right, Samuel, it's time to move on. Fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem because I have selected for myself a king from his sons. He goes to Jesse. Jesse's got like 8 sons. He goes to the very first one, Eliab, and Samuel's looking at him and going, no, he's not the one. It says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his stature because I have rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for the humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. So literally, he goes down the line. Okay, if it's not Eliab, it's the next one, it's the next one, it's the next one, it's the next one. And Samuel's like going, nope, nope, nope. He gets down to the end of the line. He's like, nope. He goes, do you have any more sons? And he goes, I've got a young one out in the field watching the sheep. Yeah, go get him. Verse 12, it says, so Jesse sent for him. He had beautiful eyes and a healthy, handsome appearance. Then the Lord said, anoint him, for he's the one. This is David. He's about 12 years old. 12 years old, and he's a shepherd. He's in charge of the sheep. And to be a shepherd, you got to be pretty tough. Yeah, I mean, you're out in the, it's almost like desert rock area and wild animals, and you're protecting these sheep. And it says, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. Imagine how that went. It's kind of like Joseph, right? The older brother's the youngest son. How did he get to be anointed by Samuel? He's just a 12-year-old shepherd boy. This was probably around 1029 BC, we're guessing, that he was like 12 years old. Just giving you a frame of reference. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David from that day forward. Like, I say this again, you're different than David because the Spirit of the Lord resides in you, just as Matt was saying earlier, he resides in you. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon David, just upon him. But you have that same God, that same Spirit living inside of you. According to Chuck Swindoll, who is the former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, he says, more was written in the Bible about David than about any other character. 66 chapters in the Old Testament plus 59 references to his life in the New Testament. Verse 14, it says, now the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul. That's not a good thing, right? He's never going to leave you. He's never going to leave. No matter what you do, he's never leaving you. That ain't happening to you. But it says, now the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul, and an evil spirit sent from the Lord began to torment him. Now that sounds evil. But think about this, the way that I see it and the way that I picture it is the removal of God's Spirit from one's life. It leads them back to the seed of Adam. And what do I mean by that? It leads them back to their sinful nature, one where they become dependent on their own self, which is selfishness. And this is exactly what Saul was displaying near the end of his life. He's like, he didn't have the Spirit of the Lord on him, and it was all about Saul, and it was about all the things that he wanted to do and all the things he wanted to accomplish. So this evil spirit is literally Saul doing things in his own strength, which you know where that gets you. Verse 21, it says, when David came to Saul and entered his service, what has happened here as we jump down is like Saul's literally losing his mind without the peace of God, without all that Spirit, which brings love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all that stuff. He doesn't have that, and so now he's just going crazy, and the only thing that calms him is like music. Anybody relate to that? Like the importance of music is like soothing. It's calming. And sometimes there's this connection. Dale, you connect with music. And this is the way it was for Saul. When David came to Saul and entered his service, Saul loved him very much, and David became his armor bearer. So basically they said, hey, we know somebody that plays this harp-like instrumental lyre that can play music, and he does it very well. And they got David to come from Bethlehem to Saul. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, which is David's father. He said, let David remain in my service, for he has found favor with me. Whenever the Spirit of God came on Saul, David would pick up his lyre and play, and Saul would then be relieved, feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. Music just allowed Saul to rest his head, because this is where the battle is. It's all right here. Now we get to the real story. 1 Samuel 17. This is probably 1024 BC, 5 years later. So now at this point, David is 17 years old. Verse 1, it says, the Philistines gathered their forces for the war at Soko in Judah and camped between Soko and Azekah in Ephesus Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah. All right, let me go on my map. Show you my map. You've got, this is Israel right here. In modern day, if you go to the left, it's the Mediterranean Sea, and you've got Gaza down here where it says Philistia, which is where the Philistines are. That's the whole Gaza area today. You've got the Dead Sea and north. You can't see it on the map. It's the Sea of Galilee. You got the Jordan River that runs between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. But right in the middle where all those points meet is what we call the Valley of Elah. There's literally a valley. You can see the mountains there on the right side of that Valley of Elah, and that's where Bethlehem is. Bethlehem is about 15 miles directly east of the Valley of Elah. And this is where the action takes place. Let me show you something else. 3 years ago, we were standing in the Valley of Elah. And my friend Kim was teaching David, and I think I said this a couple weeks ago, David and Goliath. And I had asked her to, like the day before. Little did I know that morning that we're getting ready to fly back home to America, that all of our flights were going to be canceled. And I literally spent the whole day battling in the Valley of Elah with American Airlines. That's the face of a man that had just had a rough day, trying to get like 20 some odd people home from Israel to Indianapolis, and it was an all-day, if you remember, it was like an all-day affair. And we ended up having to stay in Tel Aviv one more night, an extra night, and getting hotels and getting cars and getting everything. It was a battle. I literally had a battle there in the Valley of Elah in my Savannah banana shirt. So,
while we all hung out on the beach.
Yes, they all went. Everybody went on the beach and it was eating, and I was just like, I was just on the phone the whole time. It's good stuff. This whole Valley of Elah, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it was strategically important battle because if they could secure the Valley of Elah, it was the point between the Israelites and the Philistines, and whoever controlled it was really in control of the territory. We continue on in verse 2. It says, then they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on one hill, which would be on the west side, and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a ravine between them. Even though Saul had been rejected as king by the Lord, he still insisted on being king and leading the troops. He's like, I'm forcing myself to be the king here and to lead this thing. Verse 4, it says, then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Now, some people believe that if you go back to Genesis, it talks about the Nephilim, and there's giants in the land in Genesis back in there, but they were basically wiped out in the flood. The Nephilim were wiped out in the flood. But then when Joshua comes and he looks into the promised land, remember they sent spies in the promised land, and he's like, wait, there's giants in that land. And he's like, they're related to the Anakim group, but they look like Nephilim. He literally almost calls them Nephilim because he's familiar with the Nephilim before, that there's giants in the land, and now there's the giants. I don't believe that he was a Nephilim, but he was a big dude. He was big, and the whole Anakim family were all obviously large, and they were often compared to the Nephilim. Verse 5, it says, and he wore a bronze helmet and a bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. Okay, Eddie, come here. Come on, buddy. I have 2 kettlebells that weigh 53 pounds each, so that's only 106 pounds. He had another 14 pounds on that. Let me see you over your head. Put those over your head. Attaboy. Attaboy. Nice job.
Thank you.
Do you think you could do 14 more pounds?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, all right, you can sit down. So just think, this is how much Goliath's armor weighed when he put it on. It's insane to think about. There was a bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam. They say that just the spear itself weighed 15 pounds, like a shot put. And the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations. Why do you come out to line up in battle formation? He asked them. He's like, you guys are been scared all along. Now you're coming out here in battle formation? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Like, we've dominated you guys in the past. Choose one of your men and have him come down against me, and if he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us. Then the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other. When Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine, they lost their courage and were terrified. Now, what do you remember about Saul? When he was chosen as king, it said that he was a head above everybody else. Like, he's probably one of the biggest Hebrew persons out there. He's a big dude. And so literally what happened in those days is they would send one person out, and they would send one person out, and they would battle, and it would save killing a whole slew of people. Let's just do this one-on-one, and we'll settle this right here, which is basically what Goliath is doing. He's calling them out. But think about what happened when Jonathan was out there. When Jonathan was out there fighting the Philistines with his armor bearer, guess where Saul was? He was back sitting under, it says, a pomegranate tree. And again, Saul's doing the same thing. He's sitting back. Here's the guy that's supposed to be the king, supposed to be proving himself, big dude, and yet he's not going forward. Verse 12, it says, now David was the son of Ephratah, from Bethlehem of Judah, named Jesse. Ephratah was another old name for Bethlehem. Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war, and their names were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, the next, and Shammah, the third. And David was the youngest. The 3 oldest had followed Saul, but David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. Here he is, 17 years old. He's still the shepherd. He's been doing it for 5 years. A lot of experiences out in the field. A lot of spare time with his slingshot. And we're not talking a slingshot like this. We're talking about long leather cords with a pocket in it that he could swing and swing and swing. And he would use this slingshot method, and the shepherds did, to actually herd the sheep. Like when these rocks clashed, he would sling a rock and it could be beside the sheep. It would scare the sheep and he could get them to go a certain direction. So the dude got pretty good. You'll see how good he got. He always wanted to be in the battle with his older brother. You know how it is. You see your older brothers and you want them enter. So he's literally 15 miles away, and he goes over there just to check on things. You need me yet? You need me yet? You're a shepherd boy, go back. So he would have to tend his flock, but he would always come and check. It says every morning and evening for 40 days, the Philistines came forward and took his stand. The Philistine, that would be Goliath. It's interesting that it was 40 days because the 40 represents a period of testing in the Bible. Remember that? How many days was Jesus in the desert? He was like 40 days in the desert and wilderness area. And then also there was obviously the 40 years that the Israelites were in the wilderness. It rained for how long? 40 days and 40 nights. One day, Jesse had told his son David, "Take this half bushel of roasted grain along with these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers." This was typical. If your family went to war, you were responsible for taking care of them, providing the supplies that they needed to survive. And so families would literally transport food to the Israelites and the people who were fighting. He says, "Also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. I want my sons to be taken care of." A bribery. "Check on the well-being of your brothers and bring a confirmation from them." David's like, yeah, you get to go to the front line. There with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. His dad charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp, and as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry, Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation, facing each other, same thing they've done for 40 days. David left his supplies, all the stuff that Dad gave him, left his supplies in care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers, "How are they?" You can see him just run up there, "Hey, how you doing? I'm here. I'm in the front." It says, while he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. So now David's on the front line with his brothers, and all of a sudden they're like, "What are you doing here? Da, 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 da. You need to go back." And all of a sudden Goliath comes out. Says the same thing he said for 40 days. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him terrified. They all backed up. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, "Do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter." So now Saul has said, anybody that kills Goliath, I'll give him plenty of money and he's going to have one of my daughters. The king will also make the family of that man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel. That would be Jesse. David spoke to the men who were standing with him. "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised," that was a bad word back then, "who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The troops told him about the offer one more time, concluding, "That is what will be done for the man who kills him." David's oldest brother, Eliab, listened as he spoke to the men and became angry with him. "Why do you come down here? Just go back and watch the sheep," he asked. "Who do you leave those few sheep with in the wilderness?" Like, he even said few. Like, you have a meaningless task. "I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came down to see the battle." Ha! The very things that he's now charged David with, being evil and everything, this presumptuousness and wickedness of heart, were really basically coming out of his own heart. Whenever you step out in faith to fight the enemy, there's always going to be somebody around that discourages you. And it could even be from your own family. I'm just telling you. Verse 29, "What have I done now?" protested David. It was just a question. Come on, Eliab. Then he turned to those from beside him, to others in the front, and asked them about the offer. "Is this true?" The people gave him the same answer as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. So he had David brought to him. David said to Saul, "Don't let anyone be discouraged by him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." 17 years old, shepherd boy, no armor. I got it. But Saul replied, "You can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth. He's been a warrior since he was young." You realize that the opposite of the fear of the Lord is the fear of man, which is what Saul and David were displaying right here. David's not afraid of man, but Saul was. There's no greater contrast of these opposing fears that can be presented when David is confronting Goliath. Verse 34, David answered Saul, "Your servant has been tending his father's sheep." This is where he delivers his resume as a shepherd. "Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it. I struck it down and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur." A lion and a bear. "Strike it down and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears," plural, plural. "This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Then David said, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." He doesn't take credit for killing the bears or lions. Who rescued him? God did. God rescued me from these lions and bears. He did it, not me. That's a little opposite of what Saul was saying. Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Assuring. You think he was like fearful or laughing? Then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. He put a bronze helmet on David's head. Can you imagine? Because Saul's a big dude, David's a teenager. Whoomp. Big old helmet on his head. He's like trying to lift it to see. He says he had him put on armor. David strapped his sword on over the military clothes and tried to walk, but he was not used to them. He's like, I can't imagine. "I can't walk in these," David said to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off. Saul's literally dependent on his personal possessions, and what's David dependent upon? His faith, God. Instead, he took his staff in his hand and he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi. Look at this. These came from the valley of Elah. Yeah, it's cool. Who's going with me? Here you go, Eddie. That's yours, buddy. 5 smooth stones. Why 5 smooth stones? We later find out that Goliath had 4 brothers. It doesn't say that here. But he picked up 5 stones. It says, he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in the pouch in his shepherd's bag. Then with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Again, remember, he's well practiced. The Philistines came closer and closer to David with the shield bearer in front of him. So literally, Goliath comes, he's fully armored, his 120 pounds of armor, plus he's got a shield bearer, somebody that's like holding this shield in front of Goliath. I'm assuming it was pretty massive to cover Goliath. It says, when the Philistines looked and saw David, he despised him because he was just a youth, healthy and handsome. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Like, you're used to like shooing dogs away from your sheep. Do you think that's what I am? This is embarrassing." Then he cursed David by his gods. "Come here," the Philistine called to David, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beast." David, from across the valley, is like, this conversation is happening. And I'm assuming that even though they're across the valley, he's still having to like look up to him. He's 9 foot. David says to the Philistine, "You come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I will strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpse of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. He will hand you over to us." Do you think that Goliath was even, whatever? That's your God. When the Philistines started forward to attack him, remember, he's moving forward. David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. "Oh, Goliath's coming for you. You taunted me. I'm coming for you, David." "Oh, you're coming for me? I'm coming for you." This is the battle I'm about to see. As he's running, David put his hand in the bag, took out a smooth stone, and it hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. Like he's literally, typically if you get hit, you fall backwards, but Goliath is coming forward, and he falls forward on his face. David defeated the Philistine with a sling and a stone. That was it. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. You realize that if you did blasphemy in Israel, the penalty was you would be stoned to death. Interesting. David ran and stood over him. And he grabbed Goliath's sword. He grabbed Goliath's sword, and I just have fun picturing this right here. It says, he grabbed the Philistine's sword, and he pulled it from its sheath. I can imagine he's like straining with all he's got to like pull this heavy. It's much heavier than this. And he says, and he used it to kill him. Then he cut off his head, which was the proper way for you to defeat an enemy. That literally David took the sword and cut off Goliath's head. Now I use some creative artistic liberties here. The head is separated from the body. He had to have taken that sword and put it in his head and lifted that thing up so all could see Goliath's head. It's over. You made a deal with us. If you die, we win. It says here, he cut off his head. When the Philistines saw the hero was dead, they fled. Like we've been defeated. The men of Israel and Judah rallied, shouting their battle cry, and chased the Philistines to the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. Philistine bodies were strewn all along the Sharam road to Gath and Ekron. When Israelites returned from the pursuit of the Philistines, they plundered their camps. They took everything. David took Goliath's head and brought it to Jerusalem. We're not sure if he did it immediately or if it was when he became the king of Israel. Can you imagine just walking with a head? It's like you hold it like this, or you hold it by the hair. David took Goliath's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put Goliath's weapons in his own tent. He kept them. When Saul had seen David going out to confront the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of the army, "Whose son is this youth, Abner?" "Your Majesty, as surely as you live, I don't know." Now, wait a second. He knew like 5 years ago that David was Jesse's son because he played the lyre for him. Saul gone that mad? Or did he not care enough about David to even remember that? It says, when David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Yep, I'm 17 and a shepherd boy. And I got a big old pumpkin under my arm. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? The son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem, David answered. I'm assuming that I'm standing before you and some of you are facing a giant today, or giants. And the question I ask you is, fear standing in your way? Because I have a big God. I don't know what you're dealing with. I don't know what you're facing. I do know this. I've said this before. There's a difference. There's similarities and there's a difference between fear and hope. Both fear and hope are projecting into the future about something that hasn't occurred. Yet at the same time, they both have different perspectives of outcome. My prayer today is, as you've listened to this story, is that you trust what you know. That He's a good God, a big God, caring God. And we can move forward into the future with hope rather than fear. There's much hope. With whatever you're dealing with today, I don't care what it is, there's much hope. So, Father, I thank you for today. I just thank you for, David, the shepherd boy, that you used him in this powerful story that we've heard all of our lives. And today, I know that I've got friends out here that are dealing with stuff that's only you can deal with. And so I trust you today with them. Just watch over them, protect them, just like you did David. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.